Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1981 to take a look at the self-titled debut album by British new wave songstress and hunk of burning love, Kim Wilde. So before I get into the actual record itself, I'd like to mention the fact that today's episode is dedicated to my best friend Tim, who lives out in California. Now, Tim and I have been best friends since about 7th grade, and over the course of our 35-year or so friendship, I feel as if he and I have pretty much discussed everything that two people could possibly converse over. Now, that being said, we're both guys. Neither one of us are overly comfortable discussing, our deepest and darkest. But over the course of 35 years, I feel like he and I have pretty much touched on all of our musical and pop culture interests over the years. That is, until about a month ago, he and I were having a conversation about music, and I mentioned my fandom of British new wave singer Kim Wilde. And in response, my best friend Tim replied to me that he himself was also a huge Kim Wilde fan. Which raised the question to me, how has this, in 35 years of friendship, never come up in conversation? But I have since learned over the past month or so, since he and I have been discussing this particular topic, that I do believe that my friend Tim and I are among two of the biggest Kim Wilde fans out there in the wild. Anyway, so I dedicate today's episode to my best friend Tim, who is living out in Sacramento, California. Love you, brother. Hope to see you soon. That being said, my personal relationship with Kim Wilde, of course, began the first time I heard the song Kids in America. Probably a song that I saw on MTV or perhaps on the radio back in the 1980s, back when listening to the radio was something that young people still did. Now, unfortunately, I believe that Kim Wilde is one of those artists who has sort of been filed away in that cabinet of 80s one-hit wonders. I was just talking about this a few days ago when I was talking about a band called The Vapors. I completely disagree with that assessment when it comes to Kim Wilde. I mean, on this record alone, there are many songs, to me, that are the jugs. I mean, I would say that Kim Wilde, if you were to compare her to many of her contemporaries, people like Cyndi Lauper, Terry Dunn, Dale Bozzio, just to mention a few, artists who I feel as if get a little bit more respect, artists who have not been dismissed as 80s one-hit wonders. I feel that Kim Wilde's talent and material is every bit as good as those other artists. In fact, I would go as far as to say that not only is Kim Wilde as talented as people like Cyndi Lauper, Terry Dunn, and Dale Bozzio, but she has always struck me as being a little bit more of a badass than some of those other birds. I always picture Kim Wilde as being a woman who was capable of reapplying her lipstick with this hand while successfully fending off a gang of ninjas with the other hand. Like this. And yes, I said ninjas, which I understand it might be a little bit of an 80s reference. Ninjas were like a big thing to us back in the 80s. If you don't believe that, go back and watch some of our movies. I mean, ninjas were in pretty much every movie during the 1980s. But if you don't understand the ninja reference, I will put it in terms that are easily understandable today in 2024 and tell you that she could easily fend off a gang of morbidly obese, genderless blobs. Now, they don't pose quite the opposition as a gang of ninjas would. I mean, all you really would have to do is climb up half a flight of stairs and you basically render them, powerless. That being said, if you are a fan of 80s New Wave, as I am, I do believe that this record is an essential to your library. This is a record that I first bought on CD back in probably the mid-1990s. I was talking about this when I was talking about the Vapors on my last episode. There was back in the mid-1990s, I went through this phase when I first started really getting into kind of punk rock, post-punk, and new wave, where I would go and I would buy a lot of compilation CDs to try to find out what artists I liked, what artists I didn't like. And of course, a lot of these songs, like Kids in America, was a song that I had heard on the radio and MTV countless times throughout my youth, but it wasn't until I found this song on one of those sort of Living in Oblivion type compilations that I actually went out and I found this record on CD for the first time. And when I was talking about with the Vapors on the last episode I just did, it wasn't necessarily something that I had really any expectations for when I first bought this record. I had no idea what to expect, but this was a record as soon as I bought it and I took it home and I listened to it. This is a record that I have loved pretty much ever since. This particular copy I have on vinyl. I have had for a really long time. Actually, I remember I found this particular record in a vinyl shop, in a used vinyl shop for, I think, $3 or $4. So tisk to whoever priced that record, because to me this is an album that if you were a fan of the 1980s, especially the sort of post-punk and new wave era, to me this record is an essential. This record has a lot of sort of different music styles on it. It ranges from everything from sort of pop into sort of post-punk, new wave, and even a little bit of Jamaican reggae and ska. This record came out on June 29th, 1981. It was produced by Kim Wilde's younger brother, Ricky. I absolutely love the album cover. To me, this isn't necessarily an album cover that is dated, but it is sort of an album cover that represents a certain period of time. I guess that's sort of contradictory, what I just said. But it doesn't feel dated. It just feels like something you would see walking into a Tower Records at some point during the mid-1980s. Of course, this record starts off with the song Kids in America. This is a song that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is a song that I think, unfortunately, has sort of caused Kim Wilde to sort of be dismissed as one of those 80s one-hit wonders. That is an assessment that I completely disagree with. This was a huge song in the 1980s. I think it's difficult to overstate how huge this song was in the 1980s. I mean, this was a song that you could not get away from, and I don't know why you would want to. I mean, this song is almost as perfect a song as there is. This is a song that I never get tired of, regardless of how many times I hear it. But back in those days, it was always on MTV. It was always on the radio. I feel like it was basically in every movie throughout the entire decade. And for me, still to this day, every time I listen to this particular song, it transports me back to my childhood. It makes me feel again as if I'm living in the 1980s. And I have to tell you, as I get older and as the 80s sort of, are farther and farther in sort of our rearview mirror, I feel more and more fortunate and lucky that I was able to grow up in that unbelievable, amazing decade. Now, I realize it's the ultimate old guy thing to say, thanks for better back in my time. But I can assure you that they definitely were. I can't imagine a better time, at least in the life that I've lived. I can't imagine a better time as far as music and culture and just the life that we lived back in the 1980s. I can't imagine a better time growing up. I think back to my childhood in the 1980s, riding skateboards, being on bicycles, just spending your summers away from your parents, being outdoors, pre-internet music like this, MTV, radio, some of the greatest movies of all time. I can't imagine being a kid nowadays. I can't imagine growing up on the internet. And especially I can't imagine having a kid nowadays. Now, I'm not saying that to be harsh, or not saying that you shouldn't have kids nowadays. And I realize that as you get older, every generation says, I would never want to bring kids into this messed up world. But really, that's kind of the way I look at things. And I think back at the way I was raised, and especially, our parents back in those days, and certainly my parents had a boatload of issues and they made a lot of mistakes. But looking back on it, I'm relatively grateful for the childhood that I had growing up in the 80s. Sometimes I feel like when I watch people parent their children today, the biggest sort of trick in modern day parenting is just giving your kid, once your kid begins acting out in public, saying, you want my phone? I realize it's easy to say, like, if I had kids, because I don't have kids, and man, does it feel great not to have kids. I've never wanted kids. I, in particular, don't want your kids. But, I understand that raising kids isn't necessarily an easy thing, although I would make the argument that raising kids nowadays is probably as easy as it's ever been, because whenever your child nowadays begins to show any sort of individuality or any sort of acting out, basically you can lobotomize them by just handing them the screen that you keep in your pocket. But like I said, every time I hear this song, it takes me back to the 1980s. To me, this song is the 1980s in a lot of ways. Lyrically, I really like the song. Instrumentally, I love this song. One of the things about this song that always sort of makes me laugh is during the song when she talks about how this thing is spreading across America, and she talks about how it's going from New York to East California. And I've always wondered why East California. I picture it as if you're taking like a road trip, and let's say it's like you and your best friend and you're going to drive cross country, something I've done many times, something that I love doing. I love taking road trips cross country. I actually wish I was doing that right now, as a matter of fact. It's one of my favorite activities in the world. But I picture it's like, you and your best friend, you're in New York, you're going west, and you're not stopped until you hit the ocean. And this is going to be one of those big, like, coming of age adventures. You guys are going to have life-shattering conversations. You're going to get to know yourself and each other and the country that you live in. And you drive from New York City, you head west, you make it all the way out to California. You cross the border, and you're sitting in the passenger seat, and as your friend and you cross the border into California, you feel the car and him sort of steering you off the off-ramp. You've made it to Needles, and he pulls off the off-ramp, and he gets out, and he's like, we made it! I can't believe we made it! And you're sitting there sort of confused, thinking to yourself, man, why are we stopping here? Why are we in East California? We're like 4 hours from the beach, man. We're 4 hours from paradise. We're 4 hours from LA, San Diego, San Francisco, San Diego. Why are we in Needles, man? There's nothing here. This sucks. You sold me a fake bill of goods. And your friend's like, no, man, East California. That's where it's happening. That's the question I have every time I hear this song. Why from New York to East California? Why not just go all the way to the beach? There's nothing in East California. I've been to Needles. Trust me, there's nothing there. The second song on this record is a song that proves my point that Kim Wilde is not just your run-of-the-mill one-hit wonder. Because the second song on this record is a song called Water on Glass, and it is the Jugs. I absolutely love this song. Apparently this song is written about tinnitus, which is, of course, that ringing in your ear that you often get from being exposed to overly loud music. It makes me wonder if Kim Wilde, especially being British, especially late 70s, early 80s, I wonder how many times she went to go see Motorhead around this era, because of all the bands I've seen live in my life, which is plentiful, I've seen Motorhead live 4 times, and every time I left a Motorhead show, every single time, without fail, I couldn't help but wonder to myself, how has Lemmy done this for over 40 years? I remember the first time I heard the song Water on Glass, or when it was still somewhat new to me until I sort of read what the song was actually about. I used to think that the song was sort of about depression or some sort of, predatory, like, mental illness, because it talks about basically a voice in your head that only you can hear. It's subtle, sometimes almost inaudible, but it's always there. To me, it conjured up the idea of things like depression or self-doubt or social anxiety. It also talks about how it shuts you in a prison. You pray that it won't last. So for me, for a lot of years, I actually sort of misinterpreted this song, thinking it was something a little bit more sort of in the lines of kind of like what people describe nowadays as being like mental illness or mental health, basically under sort of an umbrella term. But apparently the song is written about tinnitus. Like I said, to me, this disproves the sort of false one-hit wonder status of Kim Wilde, because this song rules. Actually, basically, to me, there isn't a single bad song on this record. I mentioned that her brother, Ricky Wilde, produced this record. I love the production on it. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the album cover was I love the members of her band. I like the starkness of her in the white and them wearing all black. And this guy in particular right here, now I realize it always comes back on this channel to the Mr. T Experience, a band that is very important to me, a band that is probably in my top 10 favorite bands of all time. A band I've covered on this channel enough times to where I feel like their singer might file a restraining order against me if I don't cease and desist. But I love this guy right here. He looks exactly like sort of a little slightly huskier version of Frank Portman, who's the singer of Mr. T Experience. Frank Portman is a relatively small guy, but for some reason that picture of this particular guy always reminds me of Frank Portman from Mr. T Experience. Yes, I realize it always comes back to that band at some point in time. The next song after that is a song called Our Town. To me, this song is a great song. The song is sort of about a town that at one time was very vibrant and thriving, but the town has seen better days. It is on the decline. And if you listen to the lyrics to the song, it seems inevitable that the town is eventually going to die. And of course, the elders of this town are sort of in denial. The ones that aren't in denial aren't really sure what to do about it. This is where they've lived their whole lives. This is where they feel most at home. The idea of getting up and transplanting themselves somewhere else isn't something that makes them necessarily comfortable. The way I interpret this song, at least for me, is the song does remind me a little bit of my hometown. It talks about being a town far removed from the city lights. I've mentioned before that I grew up in a very small town in Northern California, up in the mountains, a town that when I was a kid and a teenager, a town that despite it really being the only world I ever knew, it wasn't necessarily a place that I had a lot of use for. It was a place where I never really felt as if I belonged, and socially among my peer group, I always felt as if I was sort of a throwaway kid. So not long after I graduated from high school, I moved away from that town, and I really, physically and sort of metaphorically, I never looked back. That being said, in 2018, my hometown, which was a town called Paradise, California, is a town called Paradise, California, fell victim to the Camp Fire up in Northern California. At the time, it was the deadliest wildfire in American history. Since then, I do believe that the fire in Maui was even more catastrophic. But it wasn't And I guess this is sort of not a great, editorial on me, but it wasn't really until that fire in 2018 that I really began to feel an appreciation for my hometown. I was feel sort of a sense of pride in the fact that I was from there. And sometimes I guess it takes catastrophe for us to realize things like that. But like I said, it wasn't until the town burned down, and I mean the town was wiped out completely, a town of 30,000 people in the mountains of California. This was a small town, but it wasn't, just a wide spot in the road. It was a place where I basically spent my entire childhood. And it wasn't until after that fire where I really started to feel as if, that's my home. That's like where this whole story began, whatever this story is. And wherever this story is going, if anywhere, that's where it all began. But it wasn't really until that fire that it hit me that, I'm actually sort of, in a weird way, I'm kind of proud of my town, even though it was a place that I felt as if it, it didn't have a lot of use for me either. It didn't necessarily treat me, as well as it treated some of its other native sons. But the song Our Town by Kim Wilde, it always makes me think of that. I remember the night of the fire in 2018, I was living in Oakland at the time, which isn't super far from where I grew up. It's about 3.5, 4 hours from where I grew up. But I remember that night I turned on the radio through, of course, the internet. You can stream radio stations from anywhere. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I remember there's a radio station up in my hometown called KPAY, which is like a news talk station. And I remember sitting at home that night with no TV on, basically in the dark, listening to the radio, listening to the coverage of the fire, listening to the coverage of, my hometown burning down, being worried about my dad, being worried about his wife, my best friend's parents, and all the people I knew up in that area, just sickened with worry. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm an idiot and everything to me sort of comes back to music, but I remember thinking about this song that night, Our Town by Kim Wilde, as I realized that my hometown was burning down. And not long after the fire and everything kind of like was extinguished and people were allowed to go back up onto the mountain where my hometown was, I went up there hoping and praying that the way the media covered the fire was overly sensationalized, as I tend to think the media usually is when they cover things like that. In a lot of ways, I was just not praying, but I was hoping that, I hope it's not as bad as I'm picturing it in my head. And it was even worse than anything I could ever imagine. It looked as if it was just post-apocalyptic. I remember driving through the town, a place I had lived my whole childhood. And even though I hadn't lived there since I graduated high school, it was a town I still knew by heart. I knew where everything was. And I remember driving on certain roads thinking like, okay, we're coming up on this person's house that I knew or grew up around or whatever. And then realizing, because there were literally no man-made landmarks, that I wasn't even in the right neighborhood. It was something that was surreal, post-apocalyptic. And that night, like I said, I remember thinking about the song Our Town by Kim Wilde. The next song after that is Everything We Know. I love this song. One of my favorite songs on the entire record. This has a real Jamaican reggae kind of vibe. I love there's a few songs on this record that have a real sort of Jamaican reggae. Like, to me, this song has more of like a roots reggae feel. There are songs later that have more of a two-tone sort of ska feel. But instrumentally, I love this song because it's got a real like roots reggae traditional sound mixed with like big heavy like new wave synthesizers. It's an interesting contradiction. It's a great song stylistically, instrumentally. To me, this song lyrically, I'm not exactly sure what it's about, but it has kind of a post-apocalyptic feel to it. It describes beaches where lovers once kissed and playgrounds where children once laughed. But instrumentally, this is probably my favorite song on the record. Lyrically, I'm not exactly sure what it necessarily means, but I love, like I said, I love that sort of mix of Jamaican influence with like, 80s, early 80s, especially new wave. Side 1 ends with a song called Young Heroes. To me, this song is very post-punky. I think it almost sounds a little bit... It's sort of post-punk mixed with a little bit of Gem and the Holograms. And if you were a child of the 80s, you will get the Gem and the Holograms reference. Now, of course, Gem and the Holograms came out long after this particular record came out, but it kind of has that vibe. Her voice on this song sounds like Gem from Gem and the Holograms. I love it. Gem and the Holograms is one of my top 5 favorite cartoons of all time, and I'm still a huge cartoon fan. But to me, this song is just a celebration of being young and sort of being, looked down on by the older generations. To me, this song sort of conjures up images of, you're hanging out on the street corner with some friends. You got your boom box, you're kicking out some tunes. You got one of your friends has a skateboard, one of your friends is into BMX. And you're just standing around, you're trying to figure out what to do with your day. Maybe it's summer vacation, maybe not. And across the way over there, you got Old Man Flenderson giving you the stink eye, sending you like negative vibes. Is he going to call the cops again, man? Yeah, he called the cops before. We're just sitting here hanging out. What's up, Flenderson? Fuck you, man. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? Your time is past, old man. This is the 80s, son. To me, this song is just fun. It's a celebration of, being like in the 1980s. And again, I mentioned it before, this reminds me, this song, sort of like Kids in America, every time I hear this song, it reminds me of just being a kid in the 1980s. Even though I didn't necessarily grow up in the most exciting town in the world, I can't imagine not growing up in the 1980s. I can't imagine what it would be like to grow up today. I remember, like I said, when I was a kid, I loved my bike. I loved my skateboard. It was like the typical sort of stereotypical thing where during summer, your mom would tell you, just be home by the time the streetlights come on, be home by dinner time. I can't imagine being a kid nowadays. I can't imagine growing up and having your childhood be watching a mukbang on YouTube. And I'm not saying that to pass judgment. I'm just saying that this song always makes me feel so like connected to my decade, I guess. The next song after that starts off side 2, a song called Checkered Love. I love the introduction to this song. It reminds me of something I had as a child that I still remember very fondly, something that I was very much in love with as a kid, and that is my Atari 2600, something that I pretty much wore out. Now, I'm not really the biggest video game guy in the world, but as a little kid, I did have an Atari 2600, and there are certain sounds you hear because the soundtracks on those games had such a distinct sound. There's some sounds you hear that just to me they trigger that sound of that Atari 2600. It's very distinct, and I love the introduction to this song. That's what it reminds me of. I've spent many hours as a young child with my Atari 2600 when I wasn't out riding my bike, which was actually probably my favorite pastime as a kid. To me, this song is great. I love this song, but to me, it's about being in a relationship with somebody that, has probably been down kind of a rough road. Maybe this is somebody who was a victim of child abuse. Maybe this is somebody who has been in sort of abusive relationships. But you get the sense that the narrator, is involved with somebody that maybe doesn't trust their love. Maybe they don't feel as if they deserve love. But either way, wherever this sort of strife is coming from, it is sort of, putting a strain on the relationship. But the narrator decides that, no, I care enough about this person. I'm going to stick it out. I want them to know that I am here for the long haul. This is somebody who probably has been with people who have mistreated them, or left them feeling neglected or unloved. And I'm going to stick it out. So I really like the song Checkered Love. That's what it makes me think of. The next song after that is a song called 26580. To me, this song has a real awesome sort of two-tone era ska feel mixed with some sort of new wave influence. To me, this song sounds a lot like Selector. I don't know how Pauline Black would feel about me saying this, but I feel like Kim Wilde's voice on this song sounds a lot like Pauline Black from Selector. This song is about basically a call girl who has an encounter with a guy who's a little scuzzy, a guy that most women might think of as being a little bit of a creep. And as he approaches her, he mentions to her that, he kind of likes it rough. But after a few hours of their encounter, she's basically got him begging for mercy. I absolutely love this song. To me, this is one of the most snug songs on the record. I love the lyrics. I love the two-tone ska kind of Selector influence on this song. I always love Kim Wilde's voice, but I like her voice a lot on this record. Like I said, I don't know that Pauline Black would necessarily like or appreciate the comparison, but to me, she sounds like Pauline Black on that song. The next song after that is a song called You'll Never Be So Wrong. If I had to pick a weakest song on this record, and I love this record, like I said before, I don't really think there's anything bad on this record, but if I had to pick one sort of weakest song on this record, it would be the song You'll Never Be So Wrong. To me, it's just instrumentally, it's a little bit generic, and I don't particularly like the melody or the cadence of the lyrics, and her delivery is a little bit not my favorite. Basically, this song is, I think, about somebody who is going through a breakup and a separation of some sort, and her friends are all trying to explain to her that she's better off, and she rejects that, saying, "You'll never be so wrong. I'll never find anybody who makes me feel that way again." This song is okay. It's not bad by any means, but it probably is my least favorite song on the record. The next song after that is a song called Falling Out. This song I really like instrumentally a lot. This song is much better than this previous song, You'll Never Be So Wrong. But this song is, I think this song is kind of about seeing somebody for who they are, but not until after the relationship's over. They sort of expose themselves behind their fake smile. And as soon as the relationship's over, they've kind of like moved on with their life. They're out there, perhaps, eyeing their next victim, and you're basically laying there shattered on the floor. That's the sort of imagery that this song conjures up. It's, to me, like I said, it's about, you see somebody for all of their positives, but as time goes on, you sort of see the chinks in the armor, if you will, and you sort of see what is actually living behind their eyes, but sort of not until it's too late, and they basically just demolish your life with very little concern on their part. And the last song on this record is another song I really like a lot, called Tuning In and Tuning On. This song is a little bit slow, but I really love the instrumentation on this song. I like her voice. I kind of like her delivery. To me, now I'm not sure if I'm accurate in what I think this song is about, but the way I interpret this song is, to me, this is sort of kind of a song about the unexplainable relationship you have with, the music that you love. And what it is that draws you to the music you love, that sort of feeling that you can't really put into words. Now, for me, I am just a general music dweeb, but if you've paid any attention to this channel over the past several months, I apologize. But if you have, you know that I am a big fan of Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey, and I have been for a substantial period of time. And when you try to explain to people, at least in my experience, why somebody is an artist that you love, in particular a favorite artist like Morrissey is for me, to me, I just find it very difficult, to put into words. For me, there's just something about his lyrics, there's something about his voice, there's just something about his music that I relate to on a level which I do not relate to any other artists in the world. Even my, number 2 and number 3 artists of all time are people that, I love, but there's just something about the music and lyrics of Morrissey that touch me in a way that nothing else does. And it's interesting, especially nowadays, because Morrissey, as I've talked about on this channel in the past, Morrissey is somebody who's become such a villain, somebody who people have tried to cancel because they are a bunch of thin-skinned twats, basically. People will ask me all the time, how can you still listen to Morrissey? Why do you still listen to Morrissey? Why don't you just, give it up and move on? He's such a jerk. He's such a Nazi. Of course, Morrissey's a Nazi, of course. But to me, it's like I said, there's just a connection to the music. There's something about it that I can't let go of. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't really have a high enough opinion of people to be peer pressured into deprogramming simply because other people don't approve of some of his opinions or some of the things that he said over the years. To me, there's just something about some artists that the relationship is something that you can't really put into words. And my relationship with Morrissey, David Bowie, Echo and the Bunnymen, people that are like really high in my top 3, 4, 5 artists of all time. That's my sort of relationship with. And I think this song is saying that. I could be wrong. I'm often wrong. But to me, at least, that's the way I interpret the song. I think it's a great song. Like I said, it is a little bit slow. I like instrumentally, I like it. I like her cadence on it. I like, at least my interpretation of it. But it does close out her 1981 self-titled debut album. Kim Wilde, over the years, has released many, many, many quality records. Of course, like any artist out there, though, who has put out a pretty substantial, catalog. Some of her records aren't necessarily the greatest things I've ever heard. She does have a little bit of clunkage in her catalog. Every single artist does, including Stephen Patrick Morrissey. There's a little bit of Morrissey clunkage out there, not a lot. But if you haven't gone back and checked out this record in a long time or at all, I would highly recommend going back and checking out the 1981 self-titled debut album by Kim Wilde. As I mentioned before at the beginning of this video, my best friend Tim and I, who we've been best friends since 7th grade, almost 35 years, we did not know that each other were big Kim Wilde fans until very recently. So I thought I would talk a little bit about this record. To me, this is an essential. This has to be in your record collection, especially if you are a fan of 80s post-punk, new wave, or even just some pretty good 80s Britpop, for that matter. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.